Hi, I'm Sean Patton, host of the Leadership After Hours podcast.
And hi, I'm Sarah Kalmeta, also known as Sarah the Pivoter and host of The Lounge.
We are so excited today. We are doing a special podcast extravaganza. We're going to be talking to each other and doing a dual episode between the two podcasts. It's going to be awesome. I'm super stoked for this.
Yeah, we had this great idea to learn more about the host of the podcast. And we were inspired by a classmate of ours at Heroic Public Speaking, which is where Sean and I met. And Sean Patton is a former Special Forces veteran. He's now a keynote speaker and a leadership coach. And we've been diving into so many cool topics. So we thought we wanted to bring this to you and invite you into our inner worlds a little bit more.
Absolutely. And Sarah, you are many things, but especially an internationally acclaimed speaker and podcast host. So I'm excited for this today, and I can't wait for this deeper conversation that I feel like we've been on like the edge of. Like we've been on the edge of these deep conversations in different times we've interacted, and now we've got some dedicated time to really go into it. So I'm super stoked for this.
Me too. It's been really cool as well in the prep phase for this because we've been sending each other our bios and looking at photographs of each other. And you had sent me two different photos, one from your Special Forces time and one a more recent photo. And it's the same person, but there's this contrast. This outward expression is very different. And for those of you who have only met me in the last few years, you know me as Sarah with the short hair. And, I'm wearing Vans on stage and, just 6-7 years ago, I was the typical corporate dress, high heels, like curled hair down to, here or something. And it's just amazing to see and look back and see that different perspective and, appreciate the journey that we've been on to get here to who we are today.
No, absolutely. And on that, I think we are both people who are looking like intentionally to evolve, right? Intentionally trying to improve, trying to get better. And I'm not sure if that's universal. I think people are always trying to do their best, but there's a certain mentality to an important value is innovating myself and becoming this better person. So what was that? You said it was just 6-7 years ago, you were all corporate out. So like, where did that transition? What happened or what was that transition for you to kind of be in the new brand, the new you, the new vision? How did that come about?
So the pivot really came about when I hit all the targets that I had been working towards and looked around and realized that I didn't want any of them and none of them made me happy. I was burnt out, I was tired, and I felt like I didn't even know myself. And yet from the outside looking in, I had this like perfect life, the travel lifestyle, the salary, the title, this big, beautiful destination wedding, the awesome flat with an awesome view. And it just was super hollow. Felt like I had been working so hard for these things that I guess I had adopted as my own, but probably societally and culturally had been told that this is what you aim for. And in that realization of, well, now what? I mean, I have to keep doing this, or like, I don't even feel good with these things. That was really the unwinding, if you will. Or I heard a really great phrase from a friend of mine who's recently retired after he sold his company. He's like, I'm now in my rewirement instead of retirement. And I was like, yes, I've been in the rewirement for the last, better part of 6 years. And it's really been a process and many pivots in between. What about yourself? What was that pivot point for you to, I guess, wake up and recognize that you wanted to do things a bit differently?
For me, it was interesting. I had a couple transformations when I first went in the military. I went to the military academy at West Point in New York, and the whole plan was I was going to be an intelligence officer. And after 18 months, I was going to put in my packet and go to law school, and I was going to be a JAG lawyer. Like that was what I was going to do. And then get into politics afterward. And then after a few years of, actual like military training, I didn't come from like a military background or family or anything. And, got out in the woods and started doing, I guess, quote unquote, army stuff. Right. I was like, actually, this is pretty awesome because I think the through line for me, despite any kind of pivots, ever since I was a kid, is leadership. Like in a strange way, I mean, yeah, even like in little league sports, right? Like I was like the catcher, the goalie, the person who was like kind of managing the team, and then I got in these leadership roles as an Eagle Scout. Like I did all this stuff.
Yeah.
And what I saw when I started doing these, this again, Army drills and tactics and stuff in the woods, I was like, this is like the purest form of leadership
Mm.
that I had encountered, because it was literally right, like hold, go left, you go right.
Yeah.
Oh, what's the new play? It was like in the moment, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the purest form of leadership. So I really got obsessed and decided to go into infantry. And then I did the infantry stuff. And then I could have gotten out after 5 years.
Mhm.
And I spent 14 months in Southwest Baghdad with a rifle platoon and sniper platoon. And I really just sat with my intuition a bit, and I was like, okay, what do I want to do? And I just had this like, I have more to give and also like more to learn.
Yeah.
And so that's when I went to Special Forces Assessment Selection, a couple years of training, got my Green Beret, took command. And it was exactly what I wanted / expected in terms of continuing to be pushed to develop at a very quick rate. I showed up to take over my first Special Forces team, the Green Berets, and I showed up 28 years old, and I was, I came there to take over. Like I was the captain, I was the commander, but I was the youngest guy on the team. and the one week after that, I was climbing a 4-inch wide caving ladder from a assault boat up to a ship underway in the ocean off the coast of San Diego, doing cross training with SEAL Team 5 and Special Boat Team 12.
Wow.
And then 6 weeks after that, we got called back for the Secretary of Defense, and I was on the Afghan-Pakistan border. Like it was just
Very
go
fast.
to very fast, and just like, and it was the push. And then I think there's a little bit of that service aspect. And I will say that after my time in Special Forces and my time in Afghanistan, it was a pretty violent deployment. I was like, okay, I think I've done my part. I had this like sort of like peace with like, okay, I think I've done this. And I kind of looked at, well, if I do 10 more years, because I was in for 10 as an officer, I do 10 more years, I could retire.
Right.
And as I looked forward, one, the jobs were almost all like I was going to come off the line. I had spent all my time on the front line with infantry, with operators, and it was like going to be all office time. And I was like, that doesn't sound great. And I also saw it that I wasn't going to probably be developed the same way. And I had all these things I wanted to try and do. Like I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I wanted to see what this whole freedom thing was all about that I've been hearing about. I went to the Army 3 weeks out of high school. It's like I never had that like freedom to be like, what do I want to do with my life? So I kind of wanted to do that. And I realized at the rate that I was going, I was worried if I did 10 more years, I was going to be burnt. Like you were talking, like completely burnt out by the pace. So yeah, so I kind of just felt like I'd done enough, and I had this, I felt this urge of the next chapter, I wanted to kind of delve into the unknown after spending 14 years, inside of sort of this military bubble,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Because no matter what you're in, whether it's the military or an industry, you are really in a bubble, especially in the early part of your career, right? Because you're saying yes to everything because you want to learn. And then you start to get on this track, and the grooves get a little bit deeper, and you're less inclined or likely to just make like, oh, I'm going to go this way now, right? And we have to have that pattern interrupt in order for us to realize that there are many different tracks, and we don't need to stay on that one. But again, it's usually that sunk cost fallacy of like, oh, I've spent this much time here, I've spent this much money in this specific type of training or degrees and et cetera. And so do I really want to change? And that is a question that is not up to other people. That is totally up to each individual. And obviously, if you have a partner or family that relies on you, you have dependents, or when you're in a true partnership with somebody else, you consider how your actions will affect others, and you have conversations around that. But ultimately, the decision is yours. What are you willing to do to live the life that you are wanting to live, to seek out new information, to new experiences? And I think a lot of people get stuck there, right? Because their identity has become their job. In aviation, it's a really big thing. A lot of people, it's not I fly airplanes, it's I am a pilot. It's
Hmm.
not, I work in aviation, it's aviation is in my blood. And that's wonderful because we need that passion in every industry. At the same time, we are multifaceted individuals. We have multiple interests and talents, and it is okay to like more than one thing. The world is very different than it used to be, and that's another part of this evolution and change.
I completely agree. And it's interesting that the same like self identity issue in terms of like uh, assign yourself your identity based on like what you do or what role you play
Right.
was something that I really had to tackle myself. As you can imagine, like you said, I come in the military, it becomes, my entire adult life
Yeah.
from time I was at high school was like, I'm Sean, the army guy, right? Or Sean the military.
Yeah.
I was Sean the Green Beret, whatever else. And it always, and like you said, in the military or in certain industries too, it's like, if you're a pilot, let's say, like, there's a certain track for that. Like, 5 year, 10 years, you're like on this thing. And I see a lot of veterans struggle with that. How do I find purpose? Because the military and those industries give you the value, and they also give you purpose. They give you a mission. It give you a team. All these things I think as human beings we really need. And then when it's time to say, when that's done, what's the next thing? And I struggle with that. And where I really saw it was then I saw my mom retire, and she
Mm,
was an educator. Right? She was
yeah.
a school psychologist, and she worked in special education. So was always working with special needs kids and advocate for them. And
Right.
she was always, so then she was like, all right, well, I'm a mom and an educator. Then she's like, well, I'm still a mom, but once your kid gets to be an adult, it's like that kind of moves on. But then she's like, I'm an educator. And then as soon as she retired, and I saw her just like, she couldn't get up in the morning. She would like sit around all day. I'm like, Mom, you got to get a schedule. You got to do this stuff. And she was really struggling. So I think it's just this universal, it is such a universal concept. And that's why I think it's so important to, I'm going to run this by you and get your opinion on it, because what I
Okay.
started doing was come with a concept, and I worked on some clients with this as well, where I said, what I want you to do is find 3 words and define you, that have nothing to do with a role you play, a relationship with someone, a job you have. If I put you on an island, your kids aren't around, like you're not mom, you're not dad, you're not CEO, you're just Sarah on an island. Who are you?
Yeah.
And and that exercise I found to be pretty beneficial. But just to be able to define yourself outside of this external factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, can I share my 3 words that just popped in my head as you were
Please
speaking?
do. Yes.
So the interesting thing about this is people, they also grab 3 words and they're like, this is me. But I feel that these words really evolve, and it's based on the situation you're in, who you're with. So like what popped into my head right now for the state that I'm currently in, and just a lot of different factors are curious. That's pretty steadfast. Silly and kind. And I love asking people to describe themselves without without giving me what they do for work, what they get paid to do, and to use different language. I had a guest on my podcast, a retired Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Jaster. She wrote a book called Delete the Adjective. And in there, it's an adjective describes you, it doesn't define you. And I thought that was so powerful, because when we label ourselves, what happens? We have the quick snap judgments that we can make. I identify with this or I don't, right? There's an immediate connection based on the words we use to describe ourselves, but it also puts us in a box. And so we're putting ourselves in a box every time we describe ourselves. And that's why I like to think of this as it's dynamic. It's a living, breathing thing, just like you, you and I are living and breathing beings, and we are going to be in different states in different times. And so this language doesn't have to be a fixed thing. And that's a new paradigm of thought for many people. So what would your 3 words be?
Mine are, and I think mine are pretty steady, which is interesting, but is warrior, leader, rebel.
Okay, nice. I've
I'm
definitely had the
always,
rebel in there for a while as like one of
yeah,
the key. It's still there, but it's just not like top of mind right now.
yeah.
And so I think that's interesting, because there are definitely going to be these pillars of words that are always there.
Mm-hmm.
But then at different times, like curiosity, that's there all the time. That word stays in my 3. I don't think I've ever had a three less list of three without that word. But there's other words that kind of seem to come and go. So I view it as like this
Yeah.
pool, and there's these overarching themes at the top. And then at different times, the words might swap, or maybe the nuance is so similar that it's kind of like a package. Like under that word comes all these other words. And then playing with it like that, it's almost like a root system underneath the surface. So you're seeing the outward expression of my foliage and my flowers, or maybe none at whatever time I'm at, right? Like a tree or a flower, but underneath those roots are always there, and they're growing deeper and wider, which is encompassing more and more as I grow and learn.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think for mine, it's like I found those, and again, and they do change and ebb and flow, and
Yeah.
of course, I think I'd add some and take some away, but it's almost like they help to not define who I am, which I like how you said that. Does not define necessarily who I am. It's almost like it's how the lens that I see things through
Yes. Yeah.
almost. And for me, and Warrior is, it's funny. My book's called The Warrior's Mindset, The 6 Keys to Greatness. And my plan was to push a lot of like that because I have a pretty strong opinion, which basically is just, I just define warrior as someone who fights for a noble cause greater than themselves.
Mm.
That's how I define it. And so I think if you define something like that in the way I look at warrior is like, there's two ways to live then. You either have a passion, you have a purpose, you have something that's bigger than yourself that you're willing to, put ahead of your own comfort, or you don't, which means
Right.
you're making decisions based on fear, right? You're making decisions based on what's going to cause me the least discomfort in the moment.
Yeah.
And so I almost look at it as like that's why a warrior to me is such like a strong part of, I guess, my identity and my belief structure.
Yeah.
Because I think that if you don't do that, it's almost like as human beings, I don't believe you can necessarily have fulfillment without. I think our fulfillment as human beings comes from impacting other people because we're communal creatures.
Yeah.
And so that's why, you mentioned earlier how you had this career and you had checked all these boxes, and it's just, you got there and you're like, still not fulfilled,
Right.
and it's like, what is that about? And so, yeah, for me, the warrior thing is really about whatever you're doing. If you want to experience fulfillment, you have to be focused on making an impact for others. I believe any sort of short self-serving goal, which is fine to have, but it's going to be short-lived gratification. It's not going to be like long-lasting fulfillment.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's, do you want an easy life or do you want a hard life? So if you make an easy decision now, you're going to often have hard things to overcome later, and your life will have a lot of obstacles and difficulty. Whereas if you make hard decisions now, you do the hard thing, you have the tough conversation, you face your fear, then you have an easy life because you don't have to go around hiding or cleaning up a mess, or at all expense with collateral damage, you reach the goal, right? I used to be like the traditional proverbial bull in a china shop. And, I'd get there I'd get there super fast, but I just bulldoze things out of my way. And that would have included people, not really thinking about the ripple effect impact, and so, yes, you can be on this steep trajectory and get those awards and things for yourself. But if you don't bring other people up with you, it's very hollow. And if you don't have community that's deeper than surface level, I think that's something that, why is the military so strong? There's the camaraderie, there's the brotherhood or sisterhood, there's the band of brothers, right? There's this feeling of, I know you have my back. Why is CrossFit like the Kool-Aid that everybody, like gets sucked into? I mean, I got sucked into that world too, I'm going to be honest. But it's because all of a sudden there's a community of people who are committed to, working out, moving their bodies and changing how they're going to eat, and they're living life in a different way. And so then that can become addictive and it feels very good. But then anyone else who's not on that journey, I was obviously like, I don't want to be in your cult of working out and whatever, But when we really look at like beneath the surface level of whatever it is, it's always back down to community and that connection and that thread of existence that like binds us together, and knowing that it takes a village to, raise an individual, to raise a child, that when we operate in these different ways, we get fulfillment from other places. And one thing I've learned is that like happiness is not the end all be all emotion. Happiness is just an emotion. It's fleeting. We feel many other things. We feel joy, we feel proud, we feel optimistic, energized, eager, determined, accomplished. We feel loved, we feel connected, we feel at ease, we feel mellow. And then we feel things like grief or frustration or I'm really peeved right now. All of these things, they're just data points for us to understand. But if we're trying to exclusively like fit in this box or this circle of happiness, we miss out on so much more of the human experience. And so really broadening that, I think, also allows people to enjoy what community brings. And, second tier fun, like enjoy and embrace the suck when it happens. And like know that it's temporary. And that's easier said than done, of course. I mean, I fall off into those mind spirals as well. I just actually had one throughout most of April. And that's okay. And it's important to talk about it because otherwise we have toxic positivity and everybody thinks everybody else is doing fine. And it's like that everything is awesome, yeah, hey, woo. And it's like, no, it's not. And that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the effort of, transparency. So if what was April about? Like what were you working through? If you don't mind
Yeah,
sharing.
thank you for asking. It was, what I believe it was, is we graduated from Heroic in March.
Mhm.
So we had this 7-month intensive journey of diving deep into our stories, our narrative, our being, and becoming more fully expressed in service of the audience and the message that we're spreading, in our aim to change the world one speech at a time, right? So like with anything in life, there's always the downstream, which people don't talk about very often. It's like, I got married, I got promoted, I did this. And then like after the high wears off, then it's okay, well, I worked for like 8 years for my medical degree. It's over now. Study's over. What do I do with myself? Right. So it's that down effect or like post-holiday blues. Most people will often feel a little bit glum after this experience of being away or having this amazing trip. So for me, it was a little bit of that. It was the ending of this journey, and we have such a wonderful cohort. And of course, energy drops off when you're not as active, but we've managed to still keep it going. And I love seeing all the messages in our group. So it was partly that. I had a very busy Q1, on the road a lot, several different keynotes, several different MC events, went to a few different conferences, brainstorming like the directions in which I would like to take my business, while also starting to get the symptoms of burnout, but maybe not paying attention because I was like, no, I'm talking about slowing down, right? Like I do the things, I meditate, I work out, I take naps, like my day-to-day is really great. Then all of a sudden I had nothing after the eclipse. We finished that retreat and then it was just 4 weeks of no activity, like no events, no gigs. So I'm staring down the barrel going, whoa, stark contrast. And then realizing that I had been deluding myself for the previous quarter of how fast I was actually moving. Now, truth be told, that is a fraction of my speed. My 70% is most people's 150%. So, from the outside, it will always probably look like I'm doing more than what most people have capacity for or interest in doing, especially if they're not a speaker or don't enjoy being, on the road or anything like that. So it gave me this beautiful opportunity to really just sit in the void and assess, what do I want? Because I had started to kind of get seduced by the ego again, of, whoa, look at all these things. Look at these accolades I'm getting. Look at how people are responding. Wow, my podcast is booked out till the end of the year. Oh my gosh, and kind of saying yes to things that maybe I wasn't even so lit up by. And so then they fell through and I was upset about it at the time. But looking back, that rejection was just redirection, right? They were not meant to happen. And if they had happened, I would find myself in December with an even greater like, oh my God, okay. I thought I fixed this, right? And that's the wrong mentality. It's not about fixing. It's just about how do I want to live my life. So April was this really interesting experience of navigating that post graduate blues, post intensity blues, and also recognizing and having a little bit of grief even for that version of myself that had come back through, and realizing, hey, these things that I was doing before were actually coping mechanisms because of XYZ. And I don't need to be that way anymore. How do I want to be? And really like sitting with that and feeling into it, because again, we can get attached to an identity. We can get attached to, this is my routine. I'm going to do this routine. And then when it starts to change, we're not very good at grieving that change. And it is a grief process. Even getting promoted at work and going from managing a team of 5 to managing an entire department of 500, right? Anything like that, your world changes, your day-to-day changes. And there's a bit of grief that comes along with that. And it's important to acknowledge and appreciate, who you were, the things you did, the habits you had, the routines that served you in the other space. And now understand that there is new fertile ground for what's coming in. But it takes effort. It takes some intention to make those shifts. We can't be the same way we were with a team of 5 that we are now with a team of 500, or whatever the case might be in that change. So for me, it was really just navigating that, and some key dates had come up, also in March. That was the anniversary of my stepfather's passing. He committed suicide, and we were with Kurt, and just that kind of narrative and the intensity of that. And for the first time, I'd had this thought of, he would have been 60 this year. Wouldn't it have been nice to celebrate that together? Because I had been angry for a long time. And so to have that thought come in was also new. And so navigating these new landscapes was something I was very much doing, and it wasn't necessarily easy. And for those of you out there who were my guiding light in the storm, thank you. I had many people that were that, I could see occasionally through the clouds and the thunderstorms, that light, and go, okay, I'm just going to navigate that way. I can't pay attention to anything else. I don't know if I know what I'm doing here, but I'm going to go that way. And that's what really got me through. No one tried to save me. No one tried to do it for me. They were just there as these lighthouses in the storm. And then, I managed to work through and feel and let myself feel. For me, that's a huge win. I was very good at disassociating for a very long time. So that was my April.
Well, that was a great analysis. And it's interesting that, we almost came full circle there with coming back to the importance of a tribe, of a community, right? Of relationships. I mean, the classic Harvard happiness study, right? That they did for 3 years, and, came up with, those who aren't familiar with it, that the number one indicator of happiness, contentment, fulfillment in life, it wasn't how much money people had or where they lived, or, it was just the quality of their close relationships. Yeah. That was it. And so it just goes to show how that is so, I think, fundamental in our DNA, and why it's important to be to acknowledge that, but then also to, I think, be intentional. That's something that actually has come into my life recently too, is making sure that I'm intentional with the tribe and the network I'm surrounding myself with. Yeah. Not just like, oh, that you seem cool. There's a lot of really cool people out there, but it's like, but I only have room for so many, and like, who do I want in my tribe that's going to make me be my best self, or help me be my best self,
Right. Yeah. And isolation is the worst advisor, and what I have noticed is I will start to isolate myself. So I'll start turning down social things. I'll start having thoughts like, well, I don't deserve to do that because of this, and I have now told people this. So when they notice that I'm not showing up in the way that I used to, or I'm not responding, or things like that, they'll message me privately and they'll check in, right? And then that can help pull me back out. And May is Mental Health Awareness Month. It's right now there's this amazing thunderstorm happening outside, and it's really cool. And I just love that deep thunder and the sound of lightning crashing. But when it's gray for a long time, I definitely have sad. Like, I grew up in Arizona, 330 bluebird days a year. I love the sun and the blue sky. um, and so oftentimes the people that are really struggling, they don't outwardly express that, and you don't know. And there was a very powerful video that I shared recently. It's two men at a rugby match, and they're like, one guy's like cheering, like, "Hey, how are you, mate?" And the other guy's just like, like pretty stern throughout all the scenes. And it's going through different games. You can tell the clothes are changing. And the like words are, it's not always easy and obvious to tell the signs. And then in the end, you see the happy person is not sitting there, and the other gentleman takes his scarf off and puts it on the seat. Right. And so it's really, really important that we don't accept that face value. Again, it's all about going beneath the surface. Can you be intentional to take the time to connect with those in your inner circle, to really see through? Because ultimately we all want to be seen, right? But we pretend because we want to be accepted. And the more we can get comfortable with the discomfort of, you may not accept me, because when you really see me, that's okay, because I accept myself. And I think that's a really important thing that our community can help us with, because they're just mirrors for us, right? We see our reflection back. How does this person see me? Right. And I definitely used to be very much the people pleaser of like, everybody has to like me. And I'd be so worried. Like, wait, but are you mad though? Like all the time. And so when you work on yourself, like you and I started to choose, we're going to pay attention to these things, we're going to work on our stories, our internal stories, then you are aware of where you might have potholes, so you can more easily navigate around them. You can start to fill them in so that they're not so bumpy when you go over. And then eventually you look back and you're like, wow, that's not even a problem anymore. Like, we repaved that whole section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I think on that too, when you aren't you're less, you mentioned self-expression with like heroic, but I think was speaking is such a powerful tool to really get to know yourself. But when you do put layers up, you do start being that people pleaser. So I found myself, right? If I start being that people pleaser, people try to like me. And that was something I struggled with younger, coming from, I grew up in Kansas, right? The Midwest, like, you don't talk about it. You don't, you don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, kind of sweep stuff under the rug, all that. And that was one thing I think the military was good for me, was like, no, like, directness is expected. Like, there's no time to beat around the bush and like see how people, just like this is how it is. Get it out quick and let's work through it. Kind of work through that confrontation. But I think that, to your point, it's like people kind of clinging to the status quo, clinging to not wanting the change, not having to grieve when you add some change in, knowing that means some part of you or some part of your life or some person is going to be out of it, to make room. Right. And embracing that. But if you put out your not authentic self, right? If you're trying to please everybody, then you look around and your tribe is surface level, because you're interacting at that surface level. You're attracting the wrong energy, the right people, instead of just saying, this is who I am. And the people that are stick around you then are the ones you actually want around you for the long haul.
Right. Absolutely. And it's tiring to keep up that facade all the time, as you were speaking, I was getting a lot of different like memories flashing through my head, because I also grew up in the Midwest. So that was also part of, like where that came from. And, in Asia, it was very challenging. I was based in Asia for 13 years, working and managing teams across 12 different countries. So navigating the nuance of communication, of expectation, of all of those things was more energetically taxing than I really gave it credit for. When you're in the thick of something, you often, you get through it. And it's only when we look back and we reflect that we can appreciate and understand really how much energy that took. And sometimes it takes going away from a place or a person or a relationship or a job or an industry to really gain that perspective. when I went back to Hong Kong last November, I was able to really see just how much energy internally that took for me to always have to kind of, something would be said and be thinking, right, this is their background. What are they really trying to say? What's the real question here? What's their intent? How do I answer this? And navigate, which in one way it served me so well because I became very good at reading people, at connecting, at being curious, not making a snap judgment decision or assumption and getting all riled up about it. So it really informed my way of being and management style. On the other hand, the limit was that it was so taxing, which I didn't recognize. And I've had many people in the last 2 years of being back in the US comment on how I seem to be aging backwards. And I was like, well, it's called less stress, more sleep, no alcohol, no sugar. Like there's a lot of different factors that play there, but a big part of that was also that energy of trying to keep up this pretense of someone that I wasn't, or trying to navigate a very complex space. And I believe we can all be better at that reflection piece. In aviation, we have the pre and post flight checklists and debriefs. We have a briefing before we go up. We have a debrief after we go down. And if we can treat the flight legs of our life in a similar mindset, we will become better at catching these things, the potholes, as they're occurring, before they occur. And we'll also be able to ask better questions, both of ourselves and the people around us.
Yeah. So two things. So I'm making notes here. One, yeah, you live all over the world. Where in Asia specifically I know you lived Hong Kong and there was some other places. Like where all did you live in East Asia?
So I was based in Hong Kong for 10 years, and that was home for me. I spent time in Singapore and mainland China, both in Shanghai and Beijing. While I was based in Hong Kong, in the beginning, my role was mostly Hong Kong and mainland China with an aircraft management company called Hong Kong Jet. Then when I moved to the logistics company Universal, I was over 12 different countries over Asia Pacific. So I would regularly travel to places like the Philippines, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, just all within that region. And it really gave me a lot of different perspective in many, many ways. And really was quite an experience, one I remember and think of very fondly. And I still consider Hong Kong home. And sometimes I have a Freudian slip when I'm talking about Austin, and I actually say I say Hong Kong instead. But that shows me that I now consider Austin home too, which is a great realization.
Yeah. So in East Asia, East Asia is like the one part of Africa and East Asia are like the two parts of the world I really want to go to that I haven't had a chance to. But through the military, spent some time in the Middle East and Central Asia. And so I got a little feel for that. And as I studied more, I've gotten really into my mindfulness meditation practice. Took me to like full blown, just like into Buddhism and everything. So I've studied a lot of East Asian religion. So my question for you is around the collectivist versus individualistic culture, right? We have like America is like the most individualistic of all individualistic cultures, right? Hyper. Yeah. Which there's some great parts about it, some not, but and then on the other hand, you see the opposite of that in a lot of East Asian countries.
Oh yeah.
What was that like in trying to balance, or what's your perspective on the dichotomy of those two sort of perspectives?
So it's interesting from my perspective. It is it's a little bit of this. We always want the thing we don't have, or we admire the thing that's different, right? Like when I had long curly hair, I wanted straight hair. Just like you always want the opposite. The grass always seems to be greener. So on one hand, there was this like admiration and awe for me being so comfortable to get up and talk in front of a crowd, or for me to self-promote in their eyes, like what I was doing on LinkedIn. And when I first got there, I was in my early 20s. Like I was completely unaware and oblivious to a lot of this and wasn't so good at reading between the lines. So I just thought like, yeah, we had this great interaction. Everybody's happy. We're friends. And then meanwhile, behind the scenes, they're like, this Sarah chick, like she really thinks highly of herself, or like, oh, well, just very different and depending on the culture. But as we got to break down those barriers and really learn, and as I started to build my awareness, that started to shift, and I was able to understand and live in both worlds. In the beginning, I remember having lunch and someone saying, "Oh, did you make that?" And I said, "Yeah, I cooked myself." They know I was living there on my own. And I asked her, did she cook her lunch? And she said, no, my mom made it. I was like, oh, great. Do you live near your mom? She's like, no, I live with my mom. And the thought that went through my like 23-year-old brain was, or 25, however old I was like, what? Like, you still live with your mom? Meanwhile, now I'm like, what's wrong with that? Right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And in Hong Kong and in a lot of these Asian countries, so you live with your parents until you get married. And then when you get married, you often buy a bigger place and then your parents move in with you and they help take care of your kids so that when you go to work, they're with family. They're not necessarily at a school. And, the thing that I've realized in my journey is that no one is self-made. We all have support along the way. We all have mentors. We all have people that support us and help us on our journeys. And it requires all of those people for like me and you to have this conversation. How many touch points of different people did we have to talk to or get supported or coached by or learn from or interact with or fail with and fail through in order to have the mindset that we have now, in order to have even met each other at Heroic Public Speaking and to be having this level of conversation, right? And so definitely my management style was heavily influenced by being over there because I learned how to be more about, I started as I grew up through this environment. It was not just about me. It was how do I teach my team to do my job so that I can continue to grow? How do I give them the tools? I went and learned something. How do I bring it back to them so that we can be on the same page? Right. And the biggest kind of culture shock I got when I came back to the US was, in Asia, you take the business card with two hands and you hand it to the person, you make eye contact and you read the name and you look back at them. And it's like the sign of respect. Like I'm seeing you, right? I'm respectful of who you are and what you do. Meanwhile, like I come back to the US, I'm at my headquarters and the guy's like, yeah, so we're going to go. I'm like, can you like look at me? I don't want your business card. Keep that. Like it was really funny to see how something I thought was a little bit tedious and unnecessary when I first got there, but I was willing to do it because I respected their culture, had now become my culture. And I found it disrespectful and amusing when I came back and didn't have that. Right. And so it's again, though, that's not the culture here. So I can't impose that. Right. I'm in the place where it's done differently. So how do I learn how to be there and meet people where they're at? And so I'm very much more on that collective side. And I learned through my time there how much community means. And I was very lucky to have chosen family while I was there, like people that I was able to build bonds with and, the orphans Christmas, the orphans, whatever, and we would all get together. So yeah, it was a stark contrast. Have you had any experiences like that? I mean, your time in the military, coming out of it. I know you've been overseas also for different tours. What was your experience on that individual versus collective?
I think that for me, trying to balance it, because when I felt that collectivist was in those other countries, you did see the bigger families together. Yeah. You did see, the whole villages and people playing different roles, and it wasn't. And then I would see that, and maybe not think too much of it. But then you would come here, and again, I think there's pros and cons of both. But you get here, and you do see people. You mentioned, like having multi generational homes.
Yeah.
And then people are sort of like, there's no childcare, there's no, anxiety around that. Like people aren't having kids. It's just like that whole thing. And we're in this like mental health crisis because we're in this go, have to achieve. And, for me, I'm a person who I do have high achievements, and I do appreciate the fact that one of the reasons we have that we may not have that collectivist thing, but on the other hand, we also have a much higher quality of life than people in at least the countries I was in, like in Asia, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq, in Lebanon, places like that. You would see there is a benefit to, in terms of at least quality of life to the things, the freedom that can be created
Right.
through that individual sort of Protestant work ethic, drive and get it. Like there, it's not like that's all bad. It reminds me like when I go, I can't imagine if Hong Kong's like this, because when I go to New York, I go to New York a lot when I was especially went to school there. And I just remember like the energy you feel when you're in that city where you're just like,
infectious. It's buzz.
It's infectious. Yeah. You're just like, oh, you're dragging the rest of us along. Like you are the reason that we have what we have. I imagine Hong Kong kind of like that.
Oh my gosh. Hong Kong is like New York on steroids. I'm not even joking. Like it's hard to imagine, but the energy is just so intense and it's like on all the time, which again, so I always like to think of things not as good and bad, but as there's a limit and there's a serve, because everything can serve you in one way and limit you in another, right? Like let's go back to the happiness conversation. If I say, do you want to be happy? What's your answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And people say like, well, oh yeah, I want to be happy all the time. What's wrong with that? So I say, okay, do you like to laugh? Do you like to laugh, Sean?
Yes.
Okay. Would you like to laugh 24/7?
No.
Right. So when you put it into that context, it's glaringly obvious. Like, no, I don't want just this one emotion, this one range of things. Also, you'd be like the Joker, right? You'd go crazy, right? You need these different experiences, and we can't experience this up here without this down here. So we need the dichotomy. We need the contrast, just like, in a speech, in a story, we need the contrast. Otherwise you don't get the message. Otherwise you don't understand what's happening and you can't appreciate. So like for us, we're talking about, okay, we were almost like ego driven before, and now we're more soul driven. Mm-hmm. Some people can begin their lives soul driven, but do they necessarily really understand how the ego driven being, the feeling of being in that is? Can they bridge the gap, right? We need the contrast, when we compare, okay, this is how this brain works and this is how a neurodivergent brain on this spectrum works, and then, but what's normal? Whose perspective are you looking at it from, right? The person over here, to them, that's their normal and you're the weird one, right? So everybody's reality is different. And so, you want to have high drive. Awesome. You want to achieve, you want to excel, you want to perform. Wonderful. Not everybody wants to, and that's okay too. I remember the first time I realized not everybody wanted to like be a leader or manage a team. I was like, what?
Yeah. It does not compute. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I was like, why? But also on the same point now, I also am enjoying learning how to sit back and be led, rather than fighting and being like, no, I got to be the one in the front. Like my idea is the best. So it's fun to play with those things once you are aware of what your predisposition is, your personality, and then to play with being the opposite, right? Not raising your hand first, not offering to be picked on or speak up, and allowing yourself to feel what it's like to watch others or to learn from their experience. And just, again, it's all about perspective.
Mm-hmm. No, I think so. And, this is along this sort of like drive, fulfillment, I think the one where my sort of edge is right now, personally, is as I've worked on myself and gone through my own journey. And like I said, I got into mindfulness. When I first got out, let's go back. So when I first got out of the military, I started a company and I ran myself in the ground, like ran myself completely in the ground, like physical symptoms, hospital, like highs, like people are like, what is this sickness test? It's like, it's just stressing myself. I've almost basically permanently shot my endocrine system and hormones from, I think a combination of it was a few years of Afghanistan, bad relationship, divorce, transition to the military, failed company. Like that was 6 years. And in that, I've always been that high drive person. And then especially through the military training, that was like refined. You mentioned earlier, like you're 70% of someone else's 100. It's honed to a point where I had to realize like, oh, I'm dangerous to myself. It took me going through all that to be like, I need to be able to control this, because in the military, the answer when things are really hard and struggling, didn't know how to get through, the answer is keep going. Because at the end of it, like the mission's going to be over. It may be 3 days, but it'll be over and you'll recover. You may deploy for 6, 7 months, 10 months, a year, but you'll come back. You'll get 30 days off. You'll get some counseling. You'll get to reset and like somebody, like the higher system is like set up to allow you to be like, hey, you're inside this space. It's safe to go 1,000 because like somebody's sort of watching. Right. And then you get out into the, I guess, real world, right? Get a civilian world. And it's like, there's no governor on the engine. There's nobody watching how hard you're going. And so right. I straight broke myself. And so now I've gone through this mindfulness and meditation. And then what I found myself about a year ago was I got so into it. And I was, man, it's like content, fulfilled, the power of now. I'm present. Oh, this is great. And then I was like, I feel like I'm also losing my edge. Like I'm not driving. So it's like, I want to be driven not by fear, or scarcity, but I want to be driven by joy and I want to be driven by other things. But it's like this scary thing of like, but do I need the fear? Do I need the scarcity to accomplish what I want to accomplish? So I'm on this like edge right now. I'm trying to balance the two. I'm not sure if you relate to that, but it's like an interesting spot where I'm at right now. I don't know how you handle that.
Oh yeah. Well, firstly, I want to recognize that you mentioned all those pivots you had in the 6-year time frame, because that's also what I had. I was like, I got married, got divorced, I got separated a year later, divorced the following year because it was COVID, so it took a long time. So I had this like big, amazing wedding, and then like going through that process the next year, and then changed job roles, and then was made redundant and started my own business. And then, couldn't leave Hong Kong for a couple of years because there's high, quarantine for 3 weeks in a hotel that you had to pay for. And then coming to the US for a 2-month trip, and then getting 2 years later, going back to Hong Kong for the very first time, now living in Austin. So like all of these unexpected pivots, and also if you would have said 6 years ago, Sarah, like you're going to chop off all your hair and you're going to live in the US, I would have been like, you are on drugs. Like, no, what world do you live in? You are like living with your head in the sand, get out of here. So a lot of times, a lot of change happens really rapidly and like a big shakeup, right? Because it's almost like the universe needs us to really feel the discomfort so that we change things. And usually once you start to change one thing, there's a ripple effect, right? And you start to realize what else doesn't fit in this new alignment. So yes, that resonates. Also very much resonates I was a competitive athlete. I was a figure skater for 11 years. My first career idea and track was go to the Olympics. Tara Lipinski went at 16, or just before she turned 16, she qualified. Like that was my whole world as a kid growing up. And then I did competitive CrossFit on a team and went to regionals with a team. And, it's great because that's where I learned perseverance. It's where I learned grit and determination and like dedication to a goal, despite it being sometimes painful and needing recovery, despite it maybe being expensive, despite it taking a lot of time and energy. But it was like that. I love to push the edge of boundaries, right? And I love that feeling. Like I actually want to do, go into the forest and do survival training. My friend's like, you want to do SEER training? And I'm like, yeah, can we? He's a retired Navy SEAL. And he's like, okay. He's like, you know what you're asking for, right? And I was like, yeah, I know. Maybe don't yell in my face, but like, let's go.
Yeah, let's at least go do the fun parts. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go do the fun parts. But like I want to really do it. There's something very empowering about being able to know you can handle yourself in a situation that's hard and that sucks. And even if you don't know exactly what to do, you have tools, you know how to use those, you know how to look for information. Like those are all useful skill sets. But same thing, like you can start to, why do you not want to be happy all the time? Well, if I'm happy and content, guess what? I'm going to cling to it. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be like, this feels really good right here. And like, I don't want to be stressed. I don't want to do that over there. Like, I don't want to do that over there. And all of a sudden the things that got you there, you're not doing anymore. So now, no business. No this. Everything's changed, but I wasn't paying attention because I was so busy in my little bubble. Right. Now I need to kind of start all over. And so it is a delicate balance. It's a bit of a double-sided coin, right? And riding the edge, as you described it, that's really what it is. It's like this tightrope when you're walking on tightrope, right? It's not a taut line. If it was, you'd just fall off. There's a little bit of slack in it.
Hmm.
So how do we walk in this path, like slowly, methodically, with intention, knowing that, oh, there's some wind and like now I'm really bouncing there, but there's enough slack here that I can like get through this point, but it's going to get more taut as I get to the end. Like that is really the dance we all have to figure out for ourselves. And it's kind of like an art form. And sometimes the things, in my opinion, that got us to where we are, they're no longer the same skills or tools that will get us to the next phase. And that's, again, letting go of the things that made you who you are and got you to here so that you can open up the door for new stuff. And I had a coach describe it once as, I'm trying to remember their name. I can see their face. I was with Jason Drees Mindset Coaching, and one of the gentlemen there used this analogy, and I'm forgetting his name. He had like a Scottish Irish accent. So if he's listening to this, then like send me a message because I want to remember who you are. He was saying it's like being Tarzan or Jane. In order to get to the next vine, when you're swinging through the jungle, you have to let go of the other vine and be in that forward momentum where you're like, at any moment, am I going to grab the vine? I don't know. But if you hold on to that vine behind you, you will definitely not reach the next one. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it's that trust in yourself, which is why I believe the fitness regimen, the discipline with any practice that you have, meditation, yoga, walking, anything you're working towards, that discipline helps you believe in yourself and know like, hey, I got this. I may not know what I'm doing, but I can figure it out,
Well, and I think that, you do build the confidence to take those bigger leaps or to walk into the unknown from those past successes or past experiences, right? You have to build on those things. And, which is reason, to your point, I think you talk to some people or some people maybe struggling because they want to make a big change and in their life. And I want to completely change jobs. I want to make this big thing. It's like, okay, cool. Like, but if you're really struggling, it's like, well, can you make smaller changes? I'm working on a program right now for self-discipline for salespeople. And it's really about that. Self-discipline really comes down to mindset. It's really about, and how do we, I say self-discipline is a tool. Self-discipline is a tool to turn an intention into a habit.
Yes.
And then as you develop in that tool gets stronger, you can build bigger and stronger things, right?
Yeah. I love that. And I forget I don't remember if it was Rick Hansen or Corey Muscara. I follow these two gentlemen. And they said, or maybe it was even Daily Stoic, but self-discipline is a form of self-love. Mm-hmm. Because you are basically choosing and committing to this process for yourself and believing that you're worthy to get there. And, I'm a big proponent of the 1 degree shift, 1% every day, one tiny little thing that you're going to do every single day that you can commit to, because then you have the result over time. I mean, nobody walks into a gym and expects to lift 100 kilos the first time they walk in there, right? I mean, unless they're like already super strong from whatever other sport, right? Like Tara Lipinski did an axle her first time on the ice because she was a rollerblade performer, or roller skate, excuse me. That's not the traditional story for most people stepping on ice for the first time, right? So being realistic, and I think what often happens, like I was talking to my younger sister yesterday, and she's about to prep for her interviews with the airlines. She's already, been approved, and it's just this like next phase of the process. And she was a little stressed about it. And I said, well, when you just make the task prep for my interview, that's so overwhelming because there's 100 micro tasks within that. Let's break it down. Let's get specific about when you're going to do what thing and for how long. And you don't have to do it all day, every day. It's like, do 10 minutes here, do 20 minutes here. And then that becomes palatable. It's like, I describe the 1% as it's like a tasty snack, right? It tastes good. You want more of it, rather than like you bite off more than you can chew and you end up choking on it. Like I love brownies, but if I took off this huge bite and choked on it, I probably wouldn't eat brownies for a while because
or you just keep eating until you get, and you're like, now I feel awful, right? Like, the kid in Halloween, like your stomach starts to hurt. Yeah. It's like, I think that's, it's so true. It's funny you bring that up because as I delve into as I delved into, okay, how am I going to put together this self-discipline course? You know, I have my own experiences in the military and all that stuff, but it's funny because when I went through and I looked at all the different resources out there, the almost cornerstone of a lot of the thought process came from Marcus Aurelius and meditations, you know? So it's like a lot of what I'm putting into it is from Stoicism and Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius on a kind of a combination of the philosophy of Stoicism mixed with, I'm also really big into conscious leadership and been studying that. Like, so consciousness with sort of neuroscience and my experience. I'm trying to like meld that together to make this new mindset shift for salespeople.
I love that. And, you know, it's like that stuff has stood the test of time, right? The Stoicism. And I love Ryan Holiday's interpretations of it and how he presents it, because he makes it very modern for a lot of people to be able to grasp. You know, if you just read like any version of translation, when it was translated is the like lens of time you're getting. So if you read a translation that was just 100 years ago, it's very different than one that was 50 years ago compared to one that's within the last decade, right? And so that's also very important to recognize. And again, it's all of your own. Like, I talk about mindset stuff, I talk about performance, and so do you. But we have vastly different experiences. And so that perspective is unique. That's why we're doing this podcast, right? And so we are the flavor that works for the person that is drawn to us. And it's just like ice cream, okay? You know, maybe chocolate's your favorite ice cream and you get that 80, 90% of the time. But one day you go in, you're like, man, this pistachio looks really good. Or that rum raisin, man, I think I'm gonna go for this. Or it's hot as heck outside and it's, you know, lemon sorbet all the way. By the way, I'm a poet, in case you didn't know it. And I'm super punny and dorky and silly. So, but you know, it's what's the flavor that you need and what's the flavor that's going to taste good. You know, if you just get chocolate because you always get chocolate, but you really wanted the lemon sorbet, you're not going to enjoy it. You're not probably even going to eat the whole thing. You're going to throw it away. And guess what? That's going to be the same thing if you start to work with a coach or buy a book or sign up for a degree because you think you want it. Like really listening to your intuition. You said at the beginning of our show. And that's something that most of us have been taught not to do. Like, just listen to the brain. That's the most important thing. And
yeah. Well, you know, and it's funny. It's so many amount of times I feel like I've had to learn that lesson. In a military sense, I had an experience where I was in Iraq with my sniper platoon, and there was a foreign sniper. I think it was from Syria. And he was like basically terrorizing this area. And what he was doing is he was shooting the interpreters. So they'd go on patrol and he would just shoot the interpreters.
Yeah, and key, right?
That's yeah. And it was like he couldn't communicate. It was also like a message, like you're working with the Americans and like this is the cost of it, to try to discourage others. And the unit that was there was really struggling. So that we went out, we actually lived in this little outpost with like 50, it was like 20 of us and like 15 Iraqis living in this little outpost. And right on the edge, and we were just like doing patrols into it. And, you know, I was young, you know, I was 24, 25 and leading this platoon. And we were trying to be aggressive to make contact and figure out where this guy was so we could take action. And we were walking on this road and the Iraqis told us, other people told us like, hey, this road has IEDs on it. Like this road there bombs, like it's dangerous. And it was like, all right, well, we'll get, the EOD team, the explosive ordnance disposal, and they would get out and they'd have these like big rollers and they'd drive ahead to like clear the route. And then they were supposed to come and they kept getting delayed. And they kept getting delayed. I'm like, man. And we're just anxious. I was like, you know what? Finally, I talked to a couple, like, we should just go. Like, screw it, right? It'll be all right. We'll be really careful. And we started walking down this road and walked down even only like maybe half a kilometer. And up ahead, like at the front, I just heard boof. And this cloud go up and I'm like, shit, like my heart sunk and ran up. And luckily I ran up to the front and I'll never forget the NCO, the sergeant up front. He was sitting there and somehow by the time this thing had exploded and I hunkered down, got up and ran up there, he had already lit a cigarette. And he was walking around. He was cussing. The kid was like, son of a bitch. And like everybody else is down pulling security, knew exactly what he wanted. The guy, he was just like, he's like, are you all right? All right. And luckily what had happened was this pressure plate that connected to make it go off went down to this det cord, and the det cord that explodes went off. And that's what that was. But underneath that was like 12 anti-aircraft rockets that didn't go off.
Wow.
So if that would have gone off, like
that,
he would have been gone, like not even around, and the people around him. And I just remember thinking like, almost that ego that like not, and I kind of knew, but I pushed down this intuition, said, it's not worth, just wait. And I learned that hard lesson. I had a couple of instances that like kind of reinforced that. And then, by the time fast forward, I'm in Afghanistan on my SF team, and there was multiple times where I wanted, mentally you want to push through those things and push down your feelings. And I had to listen to it. And I'll tell you what, every time I listened to my intuition, things worked out.
Same.
And the couple times that I didn't, it went wrong. It was just like almost every time. It's like I feel like people almost throw shade at this intuition concept, like it's some sort of woo-woo, but I think it's really just listening to the complete complex picture of all the senses and thoughts that are coming in. And like, it's a complex multi-sensory input.
Yes.
It's not some like woo-woo thing that you shouldn't listen to.
Exactly. And guess what? We have neurons in our gut. We have neurons in our heart. And we communicate through more than just our words. Because I had a friend who was an FBI informant at one point, and he remembers, and he was an older gentleman, this was like 5 years ago we were at a conference, right, with a bunch of lawyers and financiers. And so we were having this conversation. He's like, listen, man, this stuff is real, like nonverbal communication and all this. It is so real because I went through this experience, and I had to sit there with the people who were listening on the other end and dissect this hour-long meeting sentence by sentence, because they thought everything was like terrible and nothing was working and it was going wrong. Whereas I walked out of that thing like, this guy's going to work with us, but they didn't see the eyes. They didn't see the facial movements. They didn't have like any of this other context. They just had words. So it was a completely different experience for them. And, we have been taught to highly intellectualize everything. So again, good thing and bad thing. We are able to do so much. We innovate because of that. At the same time, we've lost touch with our bodies, our physical bodies. So we push through pain. I mean, competitive athletes, right? I pushed through signals my body was telling me that was probably not something I should be doing in pursuit of a goal. And then I paid for it later, right? But then you start to get, how many times have you been writing or working and you don't go to the bathroom or you don't drink water, right? Very basic things that you're ignoring the cue and input. So of course we have disordered eating, and we have, I don't trust that signal because we don't know how to. And it's really in starting to pay attention to your other senses, like your hearing, your taste, your touch. Like when you walk in a room, if somebody's just been having a fight, like you can sense it. Even the most hardcore ENTJ, CEO, ruthless, cutthroat person will walk out of a room and be like, it's tense in there. Could cut that tension with a knife. Like they say that. And then you say something about like sensory experience and whatever energy. And they're like, that's hogwash. It's like, you just experienced it. So
Yeah.
Neuroscience is finally catching up with what a lot of the, Buddhists and other like ancient Ayurvedic and Chinese traditional medicine and these things have been talking about, so we can have some context for our logical linear brains, but they are real. And it's just learning to listen to them, right? Also, if you have anxiety or anything like that, again, you said multisensory. It's not that I just listen to my anxiety and that's what I take to be the truth and like follow it. It's what's this anxiety trying to tell me? Is this something I live with day to day? And maybe there's a bit of disordered feeling. And so I discount it a little bit more than I would, or have I never felt anxiety ever before, but now I feel it. And it's a signal of maybe I should do some more research. Maybe I should vet this process a little bit more, do a background check on this company or these people, or, what I'm about to get myself into. And so again, it's data for you to then put through your own complex processor and figure out your answer. It's not a set formula like